Beyond the marked trails and warning signs, park rangers have seen things the public was never told about. Incidents quietly buried, reports locked away, and stories that never made the news. Tonight on Lostshrine, I'm bringing you 6 of the most shocking true park ranger horror stories, each one drawn from real accounts that still haunt the people who lived them. These aren't campfire legends or internet creepypastas. These are the kinds of encounters that change how you look at the wilderness forever. Before we descend into these forgotten reports, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, leave a like if you enjoy true horror, and share this video with someone who loves unsettling stories. And while you're watching, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Remote places always seem to have the strangest stories. Now, step off the trail, lower your voice, and let's begin. I worked seasonal patrols in northern Minnesota back when I was younger and didn't mind being alone for days at a time. The job was simple on paper: check remote trails, inspect old infrastructure, log conditions, and make sure nobody was squatting where they shouldn't be. Most of the forest I covered never saw hikers. No cell signal, no cabins marked on maps, just miles of spruce, birch, and black water that swallowed sound. By October, the place felt emptied out. Leaves rotted into the ground, lakes went flat as glass, and the woods carried that heavy silence that comes right before winter seals everything shut. The fire tower assignment came in on a Tuesday morning. An old structure from the 70s, maybe earlier, slated for demolition before snow made access impossible. It hadn't been staffed since the 80s, but protocols said we still logged eyes on inspections before removal. I remember glancing at the coordinates and feeling that familiar pinch in my gut. The tower sat deep in a patch of forest even other rangers avoided. No trails leading to it anymore. The access road had grown over so badly you couldn't drive it. I packed light and went in on foot. The walk took most of the morning. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no squirrels. Even the wind felt muted, like it was being absorbed by the trees instead of moving through them. I kept stopping without realizing it, just standing there, listening for something I couldn't name. Every time, there was nothing. By the time the tower came into view, my nerves were already tight, and I hated myself for it. I'd been alone in worse places. This was just another forgotten structure. The tower rose out of the trees like a rusted spine, metal legs sunk into moss and leaves. The stairs were intact but bowed slightly, each step groaning when I tested it. At the base, I logged the exterior condition, same as always. No fresh footprints, no trash, no signs of recent activity. That should have been the end of it, but procedure said I had to check the cab. That meant climbing. Halfway up, I noticed the first thing that didn't fit. The trap door at the top was closed. That wasn't unusual on its own, but when I reached it and tried the handle, it didn't budge. I leaned into it, felt solid resistance, then noticed the padlock, newer than the rest of the structure. Shiny steel, no rust, locked from the inside. I stood there gripping the ladder, heart starting to beat faster for reasons I couldn't fully explain. If someone had locked it from the inside, that meant someone had been up there. Recently. I radioed it in. Dispatch sounded distracted. Told me maintenance would have to cut me access if the lock was active. While I waited, I stayed on the platform just below the cab. That was when the woods went completely still. Not gradually, instantly. Like someone had flipped a switch. The feeling of it crawled over my skin. I realized I'd been hearing my own breathing echo inside my head because there was nothing else. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just the weather, just my nerves. Maintenance arrived almost an hour later, cutting the lock without comment. The trap door swung open with a dry metal screech, and the smell hit me immediately. Old paper, dust, and something else underneath. Faint but sour, like sweat trapped in fabric for too long. I climbed into the cab and did a slow turn, taking it in. Everything was exactly where it should have been. The desk, the chair, the rusted stove, even the old radio mounted to the wall, dead for decades. Then I saw the logbook. It sat open on the desk, not buried under debris like I expected, but positioned neatly, pen resting across the page. I stepped closer, already uneasy, and looked down at the last entry. The date jumped out first, 3 days earlier. That alone made no sense. I knew nobody had been assigned here, but what froze me was the handwriting. It was mine. Same slant, same pressure marks where I always bear down too hard on certain letters. Same shorthand I use on duty because it saves time. Even the phrasing matched the way I write when I'm tired. Weather notes, visibility. No activity observed. I stared at it long enough that my eyes started to blur. I flipped back a page, then another. Older entries were different hands, dated decades back, ending sometime in the late 80s. Then nothing. Blank pages. Until my entry. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, some cruel trick of similarity. But I knew my handwriting. I'd been filling reports since I was 18. This wasn't close. It was exact. I called down to maintenance, asked if anyone else had been up here recently. They said no. Their voices echoed up the tower, too loud in the stillness. I asked dispatch again, more forcefully this time. They confirmed it. No assignments logged, no patrols, no inspections, not in years. I told them about the logbook. There was a pause on the line that lasted just a little too long. Then they told me to leave it where it was. Maintenance would confiscate it. I wanted to take a photo, something to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I reached for my camera, and that was when I noticed the smudge on the window. A handprint, faint but clear in the dust, pressed against the glass from the inside. My handprint, same size, same scar across the knuckle from an old job injury. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. The woods below were still silent. No birds had returned. No wind stirred the treetops. I suddenly had the overwhelming sense of being watched. Not from the forest, but from somewhere closer, somewhere just out of sight. The cab felt smaller, the air thicker. I didn't wait for permission. I climbed down fast, almost slipping on the stairs, my mind racing through explanations that fell apart as soon as I formed them. By the time I reached the ground, maintenance had already sealed the logbook in a bag. They wouldn't let me touch it, wouldn't even meet my eyes. They told me to head back and take the long way around, avoid the access road. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. The walk out felt different. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Every shadow between the trees seemed deeper, heavier. I kept hearing faint sounds behind me, like footsteps that stopped when I stopped. I never saw anyone, but I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach turn, that I wasn't alone out there. When I got back, I filed my report. Dispatch took it without comment. The next day, the tower assignment vanished from the system. No demolition record, no inspection log, like it had never existed. I asked about the logbook once. I was told not to worry about it, that it had been handled. I finished out the season, but something had shifted in me. I started noticing gaps in my memory. Little things at first. A stretch of trail I couldn't remember patrolling, even though my reports said I had. A night I supposedly spent at a remote cabin, signed in and out, with no recollection of being there. I checked my handwriting obsessively, comparing it to old logs. looking for differences. There weren't any. I don't work patrols anymore. I took a desk job far from the forest, but every time I fill out paperwork, I hesitate before I write. I watch my hand as the pen moves, half expecting it to start writing something I don't remember doing. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of climbing that tower again. In the dream, the trap door is locked, and I can hear someone moving above me, pacing slowly, waiting. When I wake up, my hand aches like I've been gripping a pen for hours, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in a place no one goes anymore, a version of me is still logging the silence. Big Bend at night doesn't feel like the rest of Texas. The desert stretches too wide, the sky presses down too close, and when the wind dies, there's a silence that feels intentional, like something is waiting for you to make a sound first. I learned that during my second year as a seasonal ranger, when I drew the short straw and got assigned to backcountry patrol after a flash flood warning rolled through. The kind of shift nobody wants because you're alone for hours, driving dirt roads that don't show up on most maps, checking primitive campsites where people vanish easier than anyone likes to admit. The storm had passed by dusk, leaving the air heavy and cold. Dispatch told me to verify that all registered campers had evacuated the low areas and to note any damage. Routine work. Annoying, but routine. I remember loading up the truck, seeing my breath in the beam of my headlights, and thinking about how quiet the park felt without tourists. No headlights in the distance, no laughter carried on the wind. Just the desert, flattened and dark. The first campsite was empty, like it should have been. The fire ring was cold, tent gone, trash packed out. What caught my eye were the stones, small fist-sized river rocks laid out in a straight row just beyond the fire ring. 4 of them, even spacing. Too deliberate to be random, but not stacked or decorative. Just counted. I checked my clipboard. 4 campers had registered for that site. I stood there longer than I meant to, flashlight moving back and forth, trying to convince myself someone had done it as a joke. Maybe bored hikers, maybe kids. At the second site, there were 3 stones, 3 registered campers, same spacing, same size rocks. My stomach tightened a little, but I told myself people notice patterns where none exist. Humans do that, especially alone, especially at night. I radioed dispatch, half joking, asked if anyone had sent crews out before me. They said no, just me on backcountry. By the 4th site, the pattern stopped feeling funny. 5 stones, 5 names on my list. Each time, the rocks were placed in the same orientation, parallel to the fire ring, always just far enough away that you'd notice them while packing up. Like a tally, like a record. What bothered me most wasn't that someone had done it. It was how consistent it was across miles of rough terrain, places you'd have to hike into. No footprints around the stones, no drag marks. The desert floor was undisturbed, as if the rocks had simply been there all along, and I was only now seeing them. I kept driving deeper, further from paved roads, further from cell service, at a site that hadn't been officially checked into. No permit, no names. I found 2 stones laid out anyway. I stood there, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly, and felt that crawling awareness that I wasn't as alone as the darkness suggested. I called it in. Dispatch sounded annoyed, told me the system sometimes lagged, that maybe someone had registered late. I didn't argue. I just wrote it down. The last campsite on my route was the worst. No registration. No record at all. It was rarely used, hard to access. I almost skipped it. Something told me not to. When I reached it, my headlights swept across the fire ring and landed on a long line of stones. Not 2, not 5, more than a dozen, neatly arranged, stretching farther than my light at first, I counted them twice. 16 stones. My throat went dry. There had never been 16 people registered anywhere near that area. I felt watched in that quiet way you can't explain without sounding crazy. The desert didn't move, but it felt like it was listening. I backed away slowly, boots crunching too loud, and nearly tripped over another stone behind me. Just one, separate, like an afterthought. I didn't finish the route. I told dispatch I felt unsafe. They told me to return to headquarters. We'd review it in the morning. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every rock on the road sounded like something clicking against the undercarriage. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or figures pacing me through the dark. There was nothing, just empty road and stars that felt sharp enough to cut. When I got back, the first thing I did was check the registration log, the paper copy we kept behind the desk. I remember my hands shaking as I flipped through it. New names had been added in pen, not mine, not dispatcher's handwriting. Names I recognized. Locals from Terlingua, a mechanic who fixed the park trucks, a woman who ran a diner I ate at twice a week, even my old high school coach. All listed as having checked into primitive sites that night. I called dispatch again, my voice not steady anymore. They blamed a clerical error. Said maybe someone had transferred names incorrectly from the digital system. I asked why the names were locals who'd never camped in the park. There was a pause. Then they told me to go home and get some sleep. By morning, the stones were gone. Every campsite was clean. No rows, no extra rocks, no sign anyone had been there. The register had been corrected, the names removed. I asked around town, casual at first, then more direct. None of the people I recognized had gone camping. A few of them gave me strange looks when I asked, like I'd brought up something impolite. I tried to forget it, told myself stress and exhaustion had gotten to me. But every once in a while, on quiet nights, I'd hear it. A faint clicking sound, like rocks being placed together carefully, deliberately. Sometimes it came from outside my trailer. Sometimes it came from nowhere at all. I quit the park at the end of that season, moved away, got a different job. But the sound followed me. Once, months later, I woke up and found a small stone on my kitchen counter. Just one, clean, dry, as if it had been waiting there. I don't camp anymore. I don't like places where the land is too quiet, because I know now that something out there is counting, not people who show up, people who belong, and it doesn't need permission to add your name. People think the Everglades are loud at night. Frogs, insects, airboats whining somewhere miles off. But what sticks with me is how quiet it gets when you stop moving. The sound doesn't disappear. It pulls back like something holding its breath. That was my job back then. Night patrols, checking routes, making sure the airboat channel stayed marked and passable after storms. I'd grown up around swamps, learned early how darkness changes distances and how the land lies to you if you let it. I trusted my compass, my GPS, and the stars, in that order. That night taught me how little those things mean when the land decides to answer back. I went out just after dusk, humidity already heavy enough to feel like wet cloth pressed over my face. The sky was clear, moon thin as a shaving, and the stars were sharp. I logged my departure, throttled down the channel, and let the engine settle into that steady drone that usually calms me. The water was black and glassy, sawgrass lining both sides like teeth. Every few minutes I'd cut the engine and listen, let my eyes adjust, make sure no debris or flooded markers had shifted. Everything looked right, too right, like a place trying very hard to look normal. About an hour in, I checked my GPS out of habit and frowned. The track line showed me doubling back on myself in tight loops. I slowed, then stopped, staring at the screen. According to it, I'd been circling a patch of marsh for 20 minutes. According to my compass, I was still heading due south. According to the stars, I hadn't turned at all. I reset the unit, waited for the satellites to reacquire, and watched the same looping scribble redraw itself. My stomach tightened in a way I didn't like. Electronics glitch. It happens. I told myself that and pushed on. That's when the feeling started. The sense of being watched, not from one direction, but from everywhere the sawgrass leaned inward. It wasn't fear exactly, more like awareness, the kind you get when you realize someone is standing behind you in a quiet room. I cut the engine again and listened. The frogs had gone still. Insects too. The only sound was my own breathing and the faint creak of the boat settling in the water. I spoke into the radio, just to check in. Casual. Static answered, then a faint click. No voice. I told myself it was nothing and eased the throttle forward. A few minutes later, I saw the clearing. It wasn't on any of the maps, just an open patch where the sawgrass broke back from the water, mud banks sloping up into a stretch of dark ground. The boat slid in easy, like the place had been waiting. I stepped out, boots sinking into muck, and that's when I saw the prints. Fresh boot prints, pressed deep and clean, leading from the water up onto the bank, and then back down again into chest-high marsh. I crouched, heart thumping. They were my size, same tread pattern as my issued boots. Close enough I could have sworn I'd made them minutes earlier. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into that water. The marsh beyond was thick, dark shapes shifting with the breeze. No trail, no markers, just prints disappearing beneath the surface. I told myself someone else must have come through earlier. That size meant nothing. That fear makes patterns where there aren't any. Still, my hand hovered near the radio. I called out once, my voice flat and controlled. It died quickly, swallowed by grass and water. The radio crackled before I could key it. I lifted it, expecting static or a delayed response from base. Instead, I heard my own voice, calm, steady, saying I was fine, that I'd finished the route and was heading back early. Every word was exactly how I would have said it. Even the small pause before base, the way I clipped the last syllable. I froze, radio pressed to my ear, listening as my voice signed off. Then, nothing. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember the water around my chest, cold seeping through my clothes, the weight of it pulling at me as I followed those prints. The ground was uneven, sucking at my boots, each step a slow fight. The stars were still there when I looked up, but they felt wrong somehow, like they were farther away than they should be. My GPS was useless now, screen jittering, the track a snarl of lines that made my head ache to look at. I tried the radio again. Static. Then a faint echo, like someone breathing just out of sync with me. Time stopped behaving. I'd weighed for what felt like minutes and then realized my legs were shaking with exhaustion. Shapes moved at the edge of my vision, low, crouched things slipping between grass, always just far enough that I could tell myself it was animals. I heard splashes that weren't mine, felt ripples brush my legs from behind. Once, I thought I saw a face, pale and still, half submerged and watching. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself over and over that the swamp plays tricks, that darkness lies, that panic makes ghosts. At some point, the water dropped away, and I stumbled onto firmer ground. Trees rose around me, cypress trunks pale and smooth, knees jutting up like broken bones. I leaned against one, breathing hard, and listened. The silence was deeper here, thicker. I keyed the radio again, desperate. Before I could speak, my voice came back, this time closer, not through the radio, behind me, saying my name softly, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. I ran then. I don't know how long or in what direction. Branches tore at me, roots tripped me, water rose and fell without warning. More than once I fell and lay there, convinced something would press down on my back, push me under. It never did. That almost made it worse. When the sky finally began to lighten, the gray bleeding into the black, I found myself back at the boat. It sat exactly where I'd left it, engine cold, dew on the seat. The clearing looked ordinary in the dawn light, prints blurred and half filled with water like they'd been there for days. I don't remember the ride back, just the relief of the channel markers, the dock coming into view, the sun breaking over the trees. My supervisor was waiting, arms crossed, expression tight. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked where I'd gone. I told him the truth as best I could, words tumbling over each other. He listened without interrupting, then shook his head. He said I'd checked in hours earlier, said I'd reported finishing the route and returning to base. I laughed, sharp and ugly, told him that was impossible. He took me into the office and played the recording. My voice filled the room, calm and clear, saying exactly what he'd told me. Same pauses, same tone, even the faint background hum I always picked up on the radio. I stood there shaking, listening to myself lie. When it ended, he asked where I'd really been. I didn't have an answer that made sense. They pulled me off night patrol after that, said it was stress. Equipment malfunction, I let them say it. I didn't argue. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the radio crackle in my head. Sometimes I hear my own voice, steady and reassuring, telling someone I'm fine and on my way back. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the world feels like it's holding its breath, I wonder where I actually went that night and what walked back wearing my voice. People think Yosemite closes trails because of weather or falling rocks. Maybe the occasional mountain lion that gets too comfortable around humans. That's what the brochures say. What they don't advertise are the disappearances that don't fit clean reports. The ones without blood or broken gear. The ones where the forest just seems to keep someone. I worked search and rescue there for 6 years, mostly night shifts, mostly alone. You get used to the quiet after a while. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses in on your ears until you can hear your own pulse and every small sound feels like it's leaning toward you. That night started like any other. Late fall, shoulder season, when the tourists thin out and the park feels older somehow. The moon was low and sharp, turning El Capitan into a pale wall against the dark. I was parked near the ranger station, finishing paperwork, the radio murmuring low with routine traffic. Most calls after midnight are drunks lost on marked trails or climbers pushing daylight too far. I'd already decided it would be a quiet shift. That's usually when things go wrong. The radio crackled once, sharp and sudden, cutting through the static. Then a voice came through, calm but strained, using proper ranger codes. Not sloppy, not panicked, professional. It requested medical assistance in a closed section near El Capitan, Trail 12B, which had been chained off for months due to rock fall risk. The voice identified itself as Unit 3 Alpha, which made my stomach tighten, because that was my unit. Then it said my name. Not over the air like a greeting. It said it the way you say someone's name when you're making sure they're listening. I froze, pen hovering above the report. For a second I thought maybe someone was playing a sick joke, but the codes were perfect, the cadence exactly how we're trained. I keyed the mic and asked for clarification. No response. Just static. Then the call repeated, word for word, including my name, like a recording played back without distortion. The hair on my arm stood up. Radios glitch, sure, but they don't do that. They don't know names. Protocol says you respond anyway. You don't ignore a medical call, even from a closed trail. So I grabbed my kit, checked my sidearm more out of habit than fear and drove toward El Capitan. The road was empty, headlights cutting through the trees like tunnels. The forest felt heavier the closer I got, like sound itself was being absorbed. No insects, no wind, just the engine and my breathing. When I reached the trailhead, my headlights washed over the metal gate. The chain was still looped tight, lock intact, dust undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks. The ground looked exactly the way it had the last time I checked it weeks earlier. I got out anyway, the cold biting through my jacket, and called out. My voice felt too loud, like it didn't belong there. No answer. Just the massive, dark presence of El Capitan, looming above, unseen but felt. I checked the radio again, half expecting another call. Instead, there was silence so deep it felt artificial. I walked the perimeter, shining my flashlight along the fence line, looking for anything. Broken wire, disturbed soil, a dropped piece of gear. Nothing. The beam kept catching on the granite wall beyond the gate, the rock face disappearing into darkness above the tree line. I had the distinct feeling of being watched, not from the woods, but from the rock itself, as if something was pressed flat against it, listening. Then the radio crackled again. This time, it was my own voice. Same tone, same inflection, same slight hitch I have when I say my own name over the air. It broadcast the exact call I'd received earlier, codes and all, asking for medical assistance, saying my name. I didn't touch the mic. My hands were at my sides. I remember the smell of cold stone and pine sap, how my breath fogged in front of me as I stood there listening to myself ask for help. I felt stupid fear then, the kind you try to rationalize away. Equipment interference, feedback loop, crossed frequencies. That's what I told myself as I backed away from the gate. I keyed the mic and tried to respond, but before I could speak, the transmission cut off mid-sentence, like someone had pulled the plug. The silence that followed felt thicker than before. I realized then how alone I was. No backup within miles, no cell signal, just trees and stone and a mountain that had been there long before radios or rangers or names. I left the area. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either. The drive back felt longer, the road unfamiliar in a way I couldn't explain. Every shadow beyond the headlights looked like it was leaning inward. When I finally reached the station, I locked the door behind me, something I'd never bothered with before. I sat there for a long time, listening to the radio, waiting for something else to come through. It didn't. I filed the report before dawn. I wrote everything down, even the part about hearing my own voice, even though I knew how it would sound. A week later, I was called into a meeting. 2 supervisors, polite but distant. They told me there was no record of any transmission on that frequency at that time. No incoming call, no outgoing echo. The report was marked equipment interference and buried. My radio was checked, tested, and returned with a clean bill of health. After that, things changed. I started noticing gaps in radio traffic, moments where it felt like someone else was about to speak but didn't. Once, late at night, I thought I heard breathing under the static, slow and patient. I stopped using that frequency whenever I could, switching channels even if it meant breaking minor protocol. No one questioned it. In this job, people learn not to ask too many questions. I never went back to Trail 12B. I avoided that side of the park altogether when possible. But sometimes, when I'm driving home after a shift, I'll catch a glimpse of El Capitan in the rearview mirror, pale and silent against the sky. And I'll think about how the chain on that gate was still clean, how the dust hadn't been touched, how the call knew my name. I wonder if someone else heard it too, or if it was meant just for me. I don't tell this story to scare people away from Yosemite. It's a beautiful place. But beauty doesn't mean safety, and age doesn't mean kindness. Some trails are closed for reasons that don't fit on warning signs. I still have the radio, still hear my own voice in my head sometimes when the static gets just right. And there's one frequency I won't touch anymore, no matter how quiet the night gets. I grew up in the hills where the trees crowd close and the land watches you back. Even after transferring out west, that never left me. I still listen for things other people don't hear. That night at Lake Mead, the water was low again. Shoreline pulled back like a receding wound, exposing old bones of docks and boats that should have stayed buried. The air had that dry, dead smell it gets after sunset, dust and algae and something faintly metallic, like blood that's been scrubbed too hard. Drownings happen there more than people realize. The lake doesn't look dangerous until it decides it is. The call came in just after midnight. Dispatch said a had surfaced near an abandoned dock on the north side. One of the ones that only shows up when the water drops enough. The report was brief, clipped, like the caller didn't want to stay on the line. I asked if anyone else was responding and got static before a soft no. That wasn't unusual. Staffing's been thin for years. I grabbed my keys, clipped my badge to my belt, and headed out alone, headlights cutting a pale tunnel through the dark. The road down to the lake was empty. No campers, no late-night fishermen, just me and the sound of tires on gravel and the lake breathing somewhere beyond the hills. When I killed the engine, the silence hit hard. Even the insects were quiet, like the place was holding its breath. I stood there a moment, hand on the door, listening. Water makes a sound when it moves against old wood, a soft knocking like someone trying not to be heard. I followed that sound down toward the dock. The dock was half collapsed, skeletal planks jutting out over black water. My flashlight swept the surface, catching ripples, floating debris, the pale belly of a dead carp bumping lazily against a post. No body. I walked the shoreline slowly, boots crunching on dried mud and stones, calling out like protocol demands, though I already knew nobody would answer. That's when I saw them. A pair of boots sat at the water's edge, toes pointed neatly toward the lake. Ranger issue. Same brand, same scuffed leather, same worn-down heels as mine. For a second, my brain refused to connect what my eyes were seeing. People drown all the time, but they don't usually leave their boots lined up like they're stepping out of them. I crouched, heart starting to thud in my ears, and shined my light inside. There was a badge tucked into the right boot, placed carefully against the sole. The metal caught the beam and flashed back at me. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I reached in with shaking fingers and pulled it out. The name etched on it was mine. Same serial number, same tiny scratch near the edge from when I dropped it on asphalt years ago back east. I stood up too fast and the world tilted. I checked my belt without thinking, fingers fumbling. My badge was still there, warm from my body. I looked back at the boot in my hand, then at the one on my belt, like one of them might vanish if I blinked. The lake lapped softly at the shore, patient, indifferent. I radioed dispatch, voice tight, telling them what I'd found. There was a pause longer than normal, then a crackle, and my own voice came back through the speaker, distorted but unmistakable. Same cadence, same tired edge. It was reporting a body surfacing near an abandoned dock on the north side. The transmission ended with my call sign. I dropped the radio like it burned. When I picked it back up, the channel was dead. No response, no acknowledgement, just static and the faint sound of water moving. I remember thinking of the old stories from home, about people hearing themselves called from the woods, and how the smart ones never answered. I backed away from the boots, every instinct screaming not to turn my back on the lake. Backup arrived almost an hour later, lights flashing red and blue against the rocks. Two guys I knew well enough. They took one look at my face and asked what the hell was wrong. I pointed to the shoreline. The boots were gone, just smooth, damp sand where they'd been, already drying under the night air. They exchanged a look. Then one of them asked why I'd called it in myself hours earlier if there was nothing here. I told them I hadn't. They showed me the log on their tablet. Time-stamped report, caller ID, all of it matching my unit. I watched their expressions shift from confusion to concern, the kind reserved for someone you start to worry about. I didn't argue. I didn't know how to explain something that didn't make sense to me either. We searched until dawn. The lake gave us nothing. No body, no boots, no badge. When the sun finally crested the hills, turning the water into a sheet of dull copper, I felt wrung out, hollowed. One of the guys clapped me on the shoulder and told me to get some rest. His hand lingered a second longer than usual. Back at the station, I checked my gear again. Badge still on my belt. Serial number unchanged. I pulled the draft report up on the computer, the one supposedly filed from my unit. It sat there incomplete, words half-written, details vague, like whoever typed it didn't know the place as well as they should have. I finished it out of habit, then deleted the whole thing. It never made it past draft status. Officially, nothing happened that night. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, the heat. Lake Mead does things to people. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched after that. Not in the obvious way, but like the land itself had taken notice. Sometimes on patrol, I'd hear footsteps behind me on the gravel and turn to find nobody there. Sometimes the radio would click on by itself and I'd catch a fragment of my own voice, saying my name like a question. A week later, I went back to the dock alone just before sunrise. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove something to myself. The water was calm, glassy, reflecting the pale sky. No boots. No sign anything had ever been there. I stood at the edge and looked down, imagining how easy it would be to step forward, to let the lake take the weight and the questions both. The thought scared me more than anything else that had happened. I left before the sun got fully up. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed wet footprints on the sand behind me, matching my stride exactly. They stopped where the ground turned to gravel. I didn't look back again. I still work at the lake. I still respond to drownings. Sometimes families ask me if their loved one suffered, if it was quick. I tell them the truth as best I can. The water is cold. The dark comes fast. What I don't tell them is that sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the lake is quiet, I swear I can hear someone carefully setting boots down at the edge, taking their time, lining them up just right. I'd been on solo patrol for most of that week, the kind they give you when they're short-staffed and the weather's bad enough that tourists stay away. Olympic National Forest gets quiet in late fall. The quiet that presses in on you makes every snapped twig sound deliberate. I was assigned Sector H. At least that's what my route sheet said when I signed out. Old logging roads, heavy cedar, fog that never really lifts. The kind of place where your radio crackles more than it speaks. I remember thinking it felt wrong from the start, like I was walking into someone else's routine instead of my own. I'd gone off trail to check an illegal fire ring someone reported earlier in the season. That's when I smelled smoke. Not the sharp chemical tang of a camp stove, but real wood smoke, damp and heavy, like it had been burning all morning. That alone made my stomach tighten. Fires weren't allowed back there, and nobody had a permit for a cabin that deep. I followed the smell uphill through salal and sword fern, my boots sinking into black mud, the forest swallowing the sound of my steps. Then the trees opened just enough for me to see it. The cabin sat in a small clearing that shouldn't have existed. No road, no trail, no cut stumps. Moss thick on the roof, chimney stone dark with soot. Smoke curled lazily into the low clouds like it had nowhere else to go. I stood there longer than I should have, hand resting on my belt, listening. No voices, no movement, just the forest holding its breath around me. The structure looked old, Depression era maybe, but solid, maintained. Someone lived there, or had recently. And yet I knew, with the same certainty you know when a bridge is unsafe, that this place was not on any map. I called out, identified myself. Park Service, my voice sounding too loud, too official for the space. No answer. I stepped closer and noticed the porch boards were worn smooth like they'd seen a lot of traffic. Boot traffic, adult-sized. The door wasn't locked. It opened inward with a soft creak, the kind that comes from use, not neglect. Warm air brushed my face. Coffee, bacon grease. Something sweet underneath it, almost metallic. Inside, the cabin was clean. Too clean. One room, neatly arranged, a cast iron stove glowing faintly, kettle still steaming. On the small wooden table were 2 plates, silverware laid out properly, mugs half full. The coffee was warm when I touched it. Not just lukewarm, fresh. Someone had been there moments ago. I felt that prickle between my shoulders, the instinct that tells you you're not alone even when you are. The walls were what caught my attention next. Laminated ranger safety notices, pinned neatly in rows. Bare awareness. Fire restrictions. Lost hiker protocols. They were official. The same templates we use, but the dates were wrong. Or rather, 2 right. One from the 1970s, another from the late 80s, early 2000s. Each decade represented aging forward around the room like a timeline. The last one was from this year. Current logo, current language. Still smelled faintly of fresh plastic. I stepped closer, reading without meaning to, and that's when I saw it. Under assigned personnel, written neatly in blue pen, was my name. Full name. Last name spelled right. Below it, my badge number. I felt lightheaded, like I'd stood up too fast. I checked the other notices. Same handwriting, same name. Some had older badge formats I vaguely recognized from training slides. Others used the current system. All of them listed me. I backed away from the wall and nearly tripped over a chair. My heart was hammering now, the quiet of the cabin pressing in on my ears. I reached for my radio and called it in, trying to keep my voice steady. Dispatch, this is Ranger Collins. I've located an unregistered structure in Sector H. Possible occupied cabin. Coordinates to follow. The radio hissed, then crackled to life. Ranger Collins, dispatch said slowly, like she was choosing each word. We don't have you logged in Sector H. I frowned, glanced down at my GPS unit. The screen flickered, then went blank. That's not possible, I said. I signed out this morning. I've been patrolling this sector all day. There was a pause. Too long. Then, Ranger Collins, according to our system, you clocked out yesterday at 1700 hours. You're not assigned to any active patrol today. Cold settled in my chest. I'm on duty right now, I said. I'm standing in a cabin that has my name on the wall. I need someone out here. Another pause. I could hear papers rustling, distant voices. Ranger Collins, dispatch said again, quieter now. There is no record of a cabin in that area, and there's no record of you being cleared for solo patrol this season. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The kettle whistled softly, like it was reminding me it existed. The chairs around the table looked recently used, one pushed back slightly, as if someone had stood up in a hurry. I asked dispatch to repeat herself, but the radio dissolved into static, the kind that feels intentional. That's when I noticed the door. It was still open, but the light outside had changed. The fog was thicker, pressing against the threshold like a living thing. I took a step toward it, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to put distance between myself and whatever ritual this place represented. When I crossed the doorway, the smell of smoke vanished. The forest looked wrong. The clearing was gone. Trees stood where the cabin should have been, their trunks unbroken, ancient. I spun around. There was nothing behind me. No cabin, no clearing, just dense forest, silent and indifferent. My stomach dropped. I staggered backward, nearly falling, hands out like I could touch something solid and make it real again. The ground where the cabin had stood was untouched, carpeted in moss that hadn't been disturbed in decades. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, hours. Eventually, the cold crept through my jacket and forced me to move. My radio was dead. My GPS wouldn't power on. I walked until my legs burned, following terrain instead of trails, trying to orient myself by instinct alone. The forest felt endless, every direction the same. At one point, I heard footsteps matching mine just off to my left, stopping when I stopped. I never looked. I found a road at dusk, a real one, gravel, tire tracks. When I reached my truck, it was exactly where I'd left it. Keys still under the frame. When I drove back to the station, nobody questioned me. My log showed I'd clocked out the day before. My supervisor said I looked like hell and asked if I'd been drinking. When I insisted something was wrong, that there was a cabin, they humored me long enough to send another ranger out with me the next morning. We never found it. Not the clearing, not the chimney stones, nothing. Just unbroken forest. But when I went home that night, I found the smell of coffee clinging to my clothes, and in my locker at the station, tucked behind my spare jacket, was a laminated safety notice. Current year. My name already written in pen